The wine glass was still in my hand when she said it. Honestly, Daniel, I don't know why we keep inviting him to nice places. He orders the cheapest thing on the menu and still looks like he's doing math in his head. He's a broke old fool who doesn't belong in a restaurant like this. 12 people at that table. 12 people who heard her say it. And not one of them knew that the man she just humiliated had signed the papers that put the roof over that dining room 11 years earlier. She didn't know whose restaurant she was sitting in. She was about to find out. Stick around, because what happened in the next 10 minutes is the reason I'm telling you this story tonight. My name is Robert. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have made a very deliberate choice. I let people underestimate me. I drive a 12-year-old pickup truck with a dent in the tailgate I've never bothered to fix. I wear the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation. I clip coupons, not because I have to, but because 40 years ago I did have to, and the habit never left me. If you passed me a hardware store, you would not look twice. That's exactly how I built my life, and exactly how I intended to keep it. What people don't see is the other side of the ledger. In 1994, I borrowed $8,000 from a credit union and opened a 12-table diner outside of town. I worked the grill myself for the first 3 years because I couldn't afford to pay anyone else to. My wife, Carol, God rest her, waited every table on weekends while working a full-time job Monday through Friday. We didn't take a vacation for 6 straight years. That diner became 2 diners. 2 became a small regional chain. The chain became a hospitality holding company that, today, quietly owns 14 restaurants across 3 states, a boutique hotel, and a catering division that services half the wedding venues in this region. None of it carries my name. It's registered under a company called Lyon Hospitality Group, and unless you've read the filing documents, there is no reason on earth you would connect Lyon to a man in a dented pickup truck. I did that on purpose. I still remember the exact morning I decided to keep the money quiet from everyone outside my immediate family. My brother-in-law had found out, through a mutual friend, what the second diner had sold for, and within a month he was calling me twice a week, not to ask how I was doing, but to float opportunities he needed a partner for. When I said no, the calls stopped entirely. Not slowed down. Stopped. That was the moment I understood something that's guided me ever since. Money doesn't just attract the wrong kind of attention. It repels the wrong kind of love, too, the moment you take it away. I want to know for certain which people in my life would still show up for a man in a dented pickup truck. I raised my son, Daniel, to work for what he has. He knows what I built. Of course he knows. He grew up bussing tables in my first diner every summer from the age of 12, but I made him promise, early on, that he would never use my name to open doors for himself. He's an architect now, a good one, built his own reputation from nothing. I am prouder of that than I am of anything Lyon has ever made. But there's a reason I stayed quiet about the money outside my own family, and it isn't modesty. It's a lesson I learned the hard way, from watching what money did to people I used to trust. I watched cousins stop calling once they found out what the diners were worth. I watched an old business partner's own children turn against each other over a will. Money doesn't create character. It reveals it. And I wanted, more than anything, for the people in my life to love me for exactly what they could see. An old man in a flannel shirt who shows up, who remembers birthdays, who fixes what's broken and doesn't ask for thanks. For years, that worked exactly the way I wanted it to. And then Daniel brought home Vanessa. I want to be fair to Vanessa here, because this isn't a story about a villain who was born cruel. It's a story about what happens when someone builds their entire sense of self around what things look like, and what happens when they meet someone who refuses to perform for them. Vanessa grew up comfortable. Her father ran a successful commercial real estate firm, and appearances mattered in her house the way manners mattered in mine. Nice cars, country club memberships, the right last name attached to the right zip code. When she met Daniel at a friend's engagement party, she told him, and later told me, more than once, without any apparent embarrassment, that she was drawn to his potential. His firm was young. His prospects were good. And crucially, for what she could see, his family had some money, because how else would a kid from a small town and used pickup trucks family end up sending their son to a private architecture program? She never asked where that money came from. She simply assumed, the way people who've never had to wonder about money often do, that our family had old money, held tight, comfortable but conservative. She decided, on her own, that I was probably sitting on a modest nest egg I was too stubborn and too cheap to spend. It would have been so easy to correct her. One conversation. But I didn't, and here's the honest truth about why. In the first year I knew her, Vanessa was polite to my face and dismissive behind my back, and some old instinct in me, the instinct that had watched money poison relationships before, told me to wait and see who she really was before I handed her a reason to perform affection for me. I'm glad you waited, because the mask slipped slowly and then all at once. It started small. She'd introduced me to her friends as Daniel's father, he's retired, to the little handyman work, which was true in the sense that I do enjoy fixing things, and false in every way that mattered. At Thanksgiving, she once suggested, gently but pointedly, that Daniel and I should look into some financial planning resources for seniors for me, as though I might be a burden on my son one day. Daniel, to his credit, always tried to wave it off. Dad's fine, Vanessa. He's got everything handled. But he never told her the full truth either, because by then it wasn't his secret to tell. It was mine, and I hadn't released him from the promise. By the time their second wedding anniversary came around, Vanessa had built an entire private narrative about who I was, a stubborn, penny-pinching old man who'd never amounted to much, whom her husband loved out of loyalty rather than respect. She wasn't cruel to my face, not usually, but I heard the comments. The sighs when I ordered the cheapest entree. The look she'd give Daniel when I mentioned clipping coupons. The way she'd steer conversations away from me at parties. The way you'd steer a child away from a topic they might embarrass themselves discussing. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I'd build a life that didn't need her approval. But it stung more than I let on. Because underneath the flannel shirt, I was still a father who wanted his son's wife to see him as a whole person, not a line item she'd quietly written off. There's one dinner, months before the one I'm about to tell you about, that I think about often because it's a moment I should have realized how deep the assumption had settled in. It was Daniel's birthday, and Vanessa had organized a small gathering at their house. I'd brought a gift, a set of hand tools I'd restored myself. An old hobby of mine, the kind of thing Daniel had always loved as a kid. Vanessa opened the wrapping for him, glanced at the tools, and said, brightly, to the room, "Isn't that just like Robert? He'd rather fix something old than buy something new. I think he's allergic to spending money." Everyone laughed. Daniel laughed too, a little too quickly, the way you laugh when you're smoothing over something you don't fully agree with. I laughed along with them, but I remember driving home that night thinking, she doesn't see restraint. She sees limitation. And once someone decides that about you, every quiet choice you make gets filed away as proof of the story they've already written. I didn't know yet how far that dismissal would go. I found out on a Friday night in October, at a restaurant Vanessa herself had chosen to celebrate Daniel's biggest promotion yet. She picked the Ironwood Grille. My restaurant. Daniel had just been made senior partner at his firm, a milestone 11 years in the making, the kind of thing a father waits his whole life to see. Vanessa wanted to market properly, and she'd been talking for weeks about getting a table at that gorgeous new place downtown, the one with the exposed brick and the chef who trained in Lyon. She didn't know Ironwood was mine. She had no reason to. The lease was held by Crestline. The general manager, a sharp young woman named Priya, who I'd personally promoted from server to GM 4 years earlier, was the only staff member who knew my face on site, and I trained her, specifically, never to acknowledge me unless I greeted her first. I like to eat quietly, unnoticed, and check on my own restaurants the way any other customer would. I almost didn't go that night. Vanessa had, half-jokingly, told Daniel it might be a bit much for me, pricey, formal, not really Dad's scene. But Daniel insisted. It was his night, and he wanted his father there. So I put on the one blazer I own that doesn't have a stain on it, and I drove my dented pickup truck to the restaurant I'd built from an idea on a napkin to watch my son celebrate a life he'd earned entirely on his own. 12 of us sat down at a long table near the back. Daniel's business partners, a few close friends, Vanessa's parents, and me at the far end, which I noticed but didn't mention. The wine was good. The conversation was warm. For the first hour, it was everything a night like that should be. Then the check situation came up. Daniel's business partner had offered to cover the wine generously, and there was some friendly back and forth about splitting the bill for the meal itself. Somewhere in that conversation, I mentioned, quietly, that I was happy to cover my own portion, force of habit, the same thing I'd say at any diner in town. Vanessa laughed, not cruelly, at first, more like the practiced, slightly performative laugh of someone telling a story they've told before. Oh, don't worry about Robert, everyone. He always insists on paying for exactly his own plate, down to the dollar. It's very sweet. A small ripple of polite laughter went around the table. I smiled along with it. I'd heard worse. But then her father, half joking, asked what I'd ordered. I'd gotten the trout, the least expensive entree on the menu, same as I always did, because I genuinely liked it, and Vanessa's smile shifted into something sharper. Of course he got the trout, she said, loud enough now that the whole table quieted to listen. Honestly, Daniel, I don't know why we keep inviting him to nice places. He orders the cheapest thing on the menu, and still looks like he's doing math in his head. She laughed again, but there was an edge in it now. The kind of laugh people use when they've decided the joke is also the point. He's a broke, old fool who doesn't belong in a restaurant like this. The table went silent. Daniel's face went pale. Vanessa, what? I'm not being mean, I'm being honest. It's fine, everyone loves Dad, he's just not really a fine dining kind of guy. She waved a hand, already reaching for her wine, already moving on, like she hadn't just said the quiet part out loud in front of 12 people, in front of her own husband, in front of the father-in-law she'd apparently spent 2 years quietly filing away as an embarrassment to be managed. I sat there for a moment with the wine glass in my hand, and I felt something old and familiar settle over me. Not rage, exactly. Something calmer than that. Something closer to certainty. I set the glass down, and that's when I saw Priya walking toward her table. If you've ever been underestimated by someone you loved, written off quietly by someone who never bothered to ask who you actually were, you know exactly what that silence at the table felt like. It's not just embarrassment. It's the specific ache of being reduced in one sentence to the smallest possible version of yourself, in front of people whose opinion you didn't even want, but whose laughter still stings. I want to be honest with you. For 1 second, I considered letting it go, staying quiet, the way I'd stayed quiet for 2 years, finishing my trout, driving home in my dented truck, saying nothing. But then Priya reached the table, and her face lit up the way it always did when she spotted me in the dining room. And she said, in front of all 12 guests, in a warm, genuinely respectful tone of someone greeting the owner of the building she managed, "Mr. Hale, I didn't realize you were joining us tonight. Is everything to your liking? Chef wanted me to check personally, since it's a special table." Every head at that table turned toward me at once. Vanessa's father spoke first, confused. "Mr. Hale, Robert, do you know the manager here?" I let the silence sit for a second before I answered, because after 2 years of being politely dismissed, I found I was in no hurry at all. "Priya," I said, "everything's wonderful as always. Please tell the chef the trout was perfect." Then I turned to the table, and I said it plainly, without any performance in my voice, because the truth doesn't need to be dressed up to land. I own this restaurant. I own Crestline Hospitality Group. Ironwood is one of 14 properties. I built the company from a 12-table diner 30 years ago, and I've kept it quiet on purpose because I wanted the people in my life to want me around for reasons that had nothing to do with money. You could have heard a fork drop 3 tables away. Vanessa's face went through 4 distinct emotions in about 6 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, the beginning of an apology forming on her lips, and then, underneath all of it, something that looked a lot like fear because she was doing the math in real time. Every dismissive comment, every financial planning for seniors suggestion, every eye roll at family dinners, all of it had been said, at some point or another, in front of or directly to the man who, she was only now realizing, held the lease on the restaurant she worked her social calendar around, whose company catered her own sister's wedding 8 months earlier, whose name, under a different corporate shell, appeared on documents her own father's real estate firm had reviewed without ever connecting the dots. "Robert, she started. "You don't need to say anything right now," I said, and I meant it kindly. I want to be clear about that, because this isn't a story about humiliating someone for sport. Tonight is about Daniel. Let's not make it about me. I picked my fork back up. I finished my trout. And for the rest of that dinner, I let the silence do exactly what silence does best. It let everyone at that table sit with what they just learned without me having to say another word. If this were a different kind of story, I tell you I stormed out, or that I cut Vanessa off financially, or that I made some grand, sweeping gesture of revenge. That's not what happened, and honestly, that was never the point. Here's what had happened. 2 days later, Vanessa called me. Not Daniel. She called me directly, which she had never once done in 2 years of marriage to my son. She was quieter on the phone than I'd ever heard her, and she said something I think had been genuinely hard for her to say. "I think I built an idea of you in my head, and I never once checked if it was true. I'm sorry. Not because of what you own, because of how I treated you." I told her the truth, which was this. It was never about the money. It was about the fact that she decided, based on a truck and a flannel shirt, exactly how much a person was worth, and never once thought to look closer. I told her that was a dangerous habit for anyone to carry through life, restaurant owner or not, because sooner or later, everyone meets someone who doesn't match the box they've been placed in. Daniel and Vanessa are still married. I want to say that clearly, because this isn't a story about tearing a family apart. It's a story about a family that finally got honest with itself. Things are different now, though, in ways that matter more than money ever could. Vanessa asks about my life now. Genuinely asks, the way you ask about someone you respect. She's never once mentioned Crestline again, not because she's afraid to, but because I think she finally understood it was never the interesting part of who I am. As for Priya, I gave her a raise that week, not for outing me, but because in 2 years of managing that restaurant, she never once wavered on the one instruction I gave her. Treat every guest, famous or invisible, wealthy or not, exactly the same, until they show you who they are. There was one more conversation worth mentioning, because it surprised me more than any of it. About 3 weeks after that dinner, Vanessa's father asked to meet me for coffee. No wives, no Daniel, just the 2 of us. He ran his real estate firm the way I ran my restaurants, quietly, carefully, without much interest and flash. It turned out his firm had handled a commercial lease renewal for one of my properties 2 years earlier, filed entirely under the Crestline name, and neither of us had ever known the other was involved. He laughed about it, a little uncomfortably, and admitted that his own daughter's assumptions about money had bothered him for years, long before I ever entered the picture. That she'd grown up watching him build something real and somehow walked away thinking wealth was about appearance rather than patience. I used to worry she'd marry someone flashy and broke, he told me. And instead she married someone solid and modest and still managed to get the read wrong. We didn't turn it into a business relationship. We didn't need to. But I think that conversation did more to shift things at home than anything I said at the dinner table ever could, because it wasn't her husband correcting her anymore. It was her own father quietly agreeing that she'd built her whole worldview on the wrong measuring stick. An Ironwood Grille. It's still my favorite table in the house. I still order the trout. I still drive the dented pickup truck. Some habits I've decided were never about the money to begin with. They were about knowing exactly who I am, whether anyone else was watching or not. Here's what 30 years of building something from nothing taught me. The people who need to see your bank statement before they respect you are never going to respect you anyway. And the ones who love you before they know what you're worth. Those are the ones worth keeping close, even when they get it wrong, as long as they're willing to get it right. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear which part hit hardest. Drop in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe because there are a lot more quiet fathers and a lot more loud reckonings still to come. I'll see you in the next one.